I'm sorry to call so late. I just didn't know who else to dial. The voice on the other end of the line was low and careful, the way people sound when they are holding themselves together with both hands and cannot afford to let go. Delia Marsh had been awake anyway. She almost always was past midnight, sitting at the small desk in her childhood bedroom with case files spread around her and her mother's radio playing softly through the wall. She was 26 years old and had been a social worker for 3 years, and her personal cell number was listed on the community resource cards she left at the food pantry, the library, the after-school program on Grand Street. She had put it there because she believed that help should have a human being attached to it, not a voicemail box. She had received calls at strange hours before, parents in crisis, elderly residents who had fallen and were too proud to call 911, a teenager once sitting outside in the cold, not ready to go home. She answered all of them. Her mother, Constance, worried about this. Her father had died 4 years ago, and Constance had become quietly protective of the daughter who had inherited his habit of giving until it asked something real of her. "It's all right," Delia said, setting down her pen. "I'm here. What's going on?" A pause, long enough that she thought the call might drop. Then, "I have a neighbor, elderly woman, 81. She's been knocking on my door the last 3 nights because she thinks someone is in her apartment. I've checked each time, there's no one, but she's genuinely frightened and I don't know the right channels for this. I didn't want to call the police and make it worse." Delia was quiet for a moment, thinking, is she alone? Any family? A son in Phoenix. They're not close. How long has she lived there? 40 years, from what she's told me. She could hear in the precision of his answers that this was not a careless man. He had noticed his neighbor. He had checked her apartment 3 nights in a row. He had thought carefully enough about the situation to look for help that wouldn't frighten an 81-year-old woman. She found herself forming a picture of him before she knew anything real. "What's her name?" Delia asked. "Vera," he said. "Vera Colm." "And yours?" A brief pause. Stellan Holt." They spoke for 20 minutes. She walked him through the process of connecting Vera with an elder care assessment through the county, gave him the name of a geriatric social worker who specialized in exactly this kind of anxiety presentation in older adults, and told him what to say to Vera in the morning so it wouldn't feel like a procedure descending on her life. He listened carefully. He asked 2 precise follow-up questions. He thanked her in a way that was genuine rather than perfunctory. Before he ended the call, he said, "You didn't have to answer this late." "I know," she said. "I wanted to." Another pause. "That's rare," he said quietly. And then the call ended. She sat at her desk for a moment after, her pen in her hand, thinking about a voice that had said, "I just didn't know who else to dial," with an honesty that suggested it was not a thing this person said often. Stellan Holt was 33 years old. He had founded and still ran Holt Meridian, a real estate development company that specialized in sustainable urban housing, the kind of projects that took longer and cost more than conventional development because they were built to last and designed to be affordable. He employed 112 people. He lived alone in a corner apartment on the 14th floor of a building in the Carver district, a building his company had renovated 3 years ago from a derelict structure into something the neighborhood had actually needed. He had moved in himself because it felt right to live in what he built.
His wife, Petra, had died 2 years ago, an autoimmune condition that had progressed faster than the specialists had predicted, in the way that some illnesses refuse to follow the timeline that would be least cruel. They had been together for 6 years. She had been the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday and left notes in unexpected places, and believed, with an almost aggressive sincerity, that the world responded to warmth if you offered it first. After she died, Stellan had become very good at functioning. He was less good at everything underneath functioning. He followed through on everything Delia had suggested. Vera Colm was assessed within the week. The anxiety, it turned out, was connected to the early stages of a cognitive condition that needed support rather than alarm, and with the right care coordination, she was connected to services that made her feel less alone in the large fact of her aging. Her son called from Phoenix. It was, by Vera's account, the longest they had spoken in 2 years. Stellan called Delia's number again 10 days later. She answered on the second ring. "It's Stellan Holt," he said, "the late-night caller." She smiled before she spoke. "I remember. How is Vera?" "Better," he said, and the word carried relief in it. "Much better. I wanted you to know, and I wanted to ask." A pause. "Is there a proper way to make a donation to the county elder care program, the one you connected her with? I'd like to do something meaningful, not just a check into a general fund." She told him, She also told him, because it was relevant, and because she had learned to say useful things directly, that the program was underfunded in 3 specific areas: transportation to appointments, in-home companionship hours, and emergency response equipment for residents living alone. He was quiet as she spoke, in the listening way she had noticed on the first call, storing everything rather than waiting for a pause to talk. What Delia did not know, what she would only learn much later, through a conversation with her program director, Odette Fain, who had received an unexpected and substantial grant inquiry, was that Stellan had not simply donated to the elder care program. He had contacted Odette directly and proposed a 3-year funding partnership, covering all 3 gaps Delia had named, plus one she hadn't mentioned, but that his own research had identified. He had done it without telling Delia, without attaching his name publicly, without any mechanism for her to find out it had been him at all, except that Odette, who knew everything about her department's funding and was not a woman who kept significant things to herself, had mentioned it to Delia one afternoon in the break room with the careful casualness of someone making a point. Delia had gone still at the coffee maker. "Stellan Holt," she said. Odette had lifted an eyebrow. "You know him?" "He called me," she said, "about his neighbor." Odette had looked at her for a moment. "He said specifically that someone on your team had identified the gaps. He wanted them addressed." A pause. "He didn't name you." Delia drove home that evening thinking about a man who had called at midnight because he didn't want an elderly woman to be frightened, and had then quietly funded the infrastructure that would help thousands of people like her, and had protected her role in it by not naming her. She sat with that for a long time. She called him. He answered immediately. "Delia, you funded the program," she said. A silence. Then, "Odette told you."
She did. Delia paused. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because it wasn't about me," he said simply. "You told me what was needed. I had the means to address it. That seemed like the whole equation." She was quiet for a moment. Outside her window, the street was dark and ordinary. Her mother's light was on in the kitchen. "Stellan," she said, "can I ask you something personal?" "Yes." "Are you all right? Not the work, not the program. You." The silence this time was longer. She did not fill it. "I'm better than I was," he said finally, and his voice had shifted. The same quality she had heard at midnight on that first call, something underneath the composure, something honest and a little unguarded. "My wife died 2 years ago. I've been building things. It helps. But your question is the first time in a while that someone has asked about me rather than what I'm doing." Delia felt something quiet move through her. "I'm sorry about your wife," she said. "Thank you." A pause. "She would have liked you. She believed in answering the call." Delia pressed her lips together. The kitchen light was still on. Her mother would have tea waiting, the way she always did. "I think she taught you well," she said softly. He was quiet for a moment that felt like something being carefully and deliberately decided. Then, "Would you be willing to have coffee sometime? I'd like to talk about the program and other things, if that's all right." "It's all right," she said. "I'd like that." She set the phone down and sat for a moment in the dark of her room, thinking about a call that had come at midnight from a man she had never met, and how the simplest act of answering, of being present, of picking up when someone didn't know who else to dial, had been the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted. That is what kindness does, quietly, when no one is calculating the return. It opens doors in the dark. And sometimes, on the other side of those doors, there is more light than either person knew to hope for.